So I'd either cast them in the role, or if I'm tapping into my love of the next generation, definitely Lieutenant Worf.
I fucking knew it! I was like, it's Sarek or Worf. No question.
My favorite, like, stoic men from Star Trek who could totally play the mysterious and gruff, hard to get close to Mr. Rochester.
Perhaps today is a good day to lock a woman in an attic.
Oh my god, yes.
Oh my god.
Ramming speed! Lillian, hi. Live long and prosper to you. And how's it going? How are you?
It's going so good. I really feel like I've lived for a long time. I'm going to continue to live, and I feel like I'm prospering.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. I feel the same, especially since, not to toot my own horn, but I am putting a little birthday hat on right now and saying, today is my birthday.
Happy birthday, Piper.
Oh my god, I'm so excited. Thank you. And I love so much that I get to spend it with you, Lillian, my wonderful co-host, all of our fabulous listeners, and a surprise birthday guest here just for this special occasion.
Yay.
Sam Weigel, my fiance.
Yay.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, Sam.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. I was actually going to introduce myself as Piper Cleveland and see if the audience could tell the difference, but I guess you kind of gave up the ghost on that one a little early.
Well, you could only do that if you did your best impression of my voice, which I think would be horrifying.
Hi, I'm Piper.
Yeah, no.
Oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that, though.
That was way worse. You just lost so many points.
It was a fun joke, and then you ruined it.
My number one goal anytime I guest on a podcast is mischief.
Yes.
And if I can make the two proper hosts uncomfortable, then I've achieved that goal, I think.
Well, you're
good.
off to a great start. So people who've listened to the show have probably heard us make plenty of jokes about this wonderful person at his expense. And so now he is here to joke right back at us and talk about not only Jane Eyre, but Jane Eyre as seen through the eyes of Star Trek.
Janeway Eyre.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to make that reference, but
Well,
It's her birthday, and you're a thief.
we're 1-1. It's even now. So
so Lillian and I were saying that we thought it might be kind of fun to start with our very first guest by putting you on the spot.
yeah, of
And
course.
having you run a Jane Eyre gauntlet of sorts. So, Sam, maybe you want to talk to us a bit about your Airbuds journey, what you've learned, and what you're excited about today.
Well, okay. I am really excited to be on here. I am what you might call a bit of an Airbuds super fan. I have listened to every episode, mostly to completion.
Oh, no. I will leave this podcast, Sam.
Lillian, I don't know why you're uncomfortable by that. But it's actually been a really interesting sort of journey because I remember when you watched the first time you watched Jane Eyre, you talked about it on our podcast World Forge, which I know you've talked about on Jane Eyre before as well. And you were just like, this story is so buck wild. And I was kind of like, yeah, I know, it's weird, right? My only experience of it at that time had been a local community theater production of it at the Bloomington Center for Performing Arts or something like that. When I think I was in middle school, I went on a field trip and I went and saw it. And I remember at the time, as a middle schooler, I was edgy and lame and thought I was too cool for any of that stuff. And I was like, what is this? I thought it was super weird at the time. And then as you were describing it to me, I was like, oh, maybe middle school me was right. This sounds insane. This sounds like madness.
What an odd show to bring a bunch of middle schoolers to.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I remember the strong feeling that I had coming out of it was just, this was kind of weird and I'll probably forget most of it tomorrow. And I did. And then as you were describing it to us, it kind of brought all these sort of memories of it flooding back. And I was like, did I block this off? Was this a traumatic experience for me? I don't really know what this is all about. But now going through and obviously listening to your podcast, I think it's kind of interesting that I wouldn't say that I've fully come around maybe in the way that Lillian kind of has.
You're not Stockholm syndromed yet.
No, not quite.
Well, you haven't watched 13 versions of
this.
As
exactly.
We've watched 9.
9. Okay, well, we're like episode 13, 14, somewhere up there.
But I do think it's really interesting to hear all of the differences between all these different adaptations, because I think that does kind of highlight the depth of the story and how people can take different things away from it. The aspects of the story that are important to different writers and directors and creators and what they want to sort of highlight in their versions of it. I think that is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
From sort of the background perspective of it. I think that's really, really cool to see. So I have really loved getting to hear you two break down, when Anna Quaquin plays a character versus when somebody else plays it, like what that sort of brings to the table has been really, really cool.
Yeah, that makes me think, Sam. So I think one of the things that is so cool about this story is because it is, it's existed so long in our culture, and these characters, for the most part, are pretty well known. It seems if you kind of stray a bit from the crowd of people who enjoy sort of classic literature, maybe Jane Eyre is not well as thought of as some of other classic novels, but for the most part, it is pretty recognizable. And so I would think that would be a really exciting challenge for an actor or actress to say, what are you going to do with the character of Rochester? What are you going to bring to the character of Jane Eyre?
Yeah.
And it makes me think of you mentioning going to a local theater production. When I was little, my family and I, like pretty much every other year, we would go to the Guthrie, which is a pretty nationally well-renowned theater here in the Twin Cities. And we would go and see a production of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
And that is a show and a story that has existed for a really long time and has been done again and again and again. And I think when you have a story that's been told that many times, because you don't want to simply fall into, boredom or repetition, you can say, how can I interpret this tale? What can I bring to this production that hasn't been done before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think out of that, I definitely do. I don't necessarily think I can say, oh, I love Jane Eyre. I definitely can appreciate, I never thought it was like, valueless, or that's not at all what I meant. I was just kind of like, oh, maybe it wasn't for me, but I do think it's really cool to sort of see, oh, I get why people hold this up so high and why it's kind of put on a pedestal. And I think
what I'm hearing is that since Sam is like open to it but doesn't love it yet, we should tie him down, make him watch 10 different versions of Jane Eyre, because that's what worked for me. Was having I had to watch it, and then the more I had to watch it, the more I was like, there might be something to this. Like, I was the first person to discover Jane Eyre.
Please do not do a Clockwork Orange on me and make me
see. So, Lillian,
I
think I know the answer to this, but if you had to force Sam to watch one version of Jane Eyre to make him like it, which one would you make him watch? Oh, although you can answer the other question. If you had to torture Sam, Clockwork Orange style, and make him watch a version, which would you do? Let's answer both questions.
Yeah. Okay. If I was trying to make him like it, because I have to think, I know what I would have, like somebody who had my sensibilities, I would make them watch the 2006. Yes, I don't know that Sam likes and dislikes the same things as me.
I think that one is the one that makes Rochester the most likable, and therefore it's easiest for an audience to get behind the love story instead of getting caught up in the this is twisted and messed up kind of plot lines.
And and I think to that point, I do feel like that's the thing that to me, like especially when I first started listening to this podcast and when you first started talking about it, I was like, how could anyone like this guy in any way? He just seems like, I don't know, just standoffish and weird and unpleasant and like all the things that kind of would be like, I'm not gonna try to crack that shell.
So clearly Sam has not read many romance novels.
Yeah.
There's definitely a trope to the powerful, wealthy, brooding, angry man. And it's like, yes, on paper with those bullet points, you should not find that attractive. But when he stands close to you and grumbles roughly and he's like, no woman could ever love me. And you're like, I could love you.
Yeah.
I could save you.
It also feels like the I'll save you thing. I feel like Sam doesn't get that. Like Sam's not out here trying to fix him. Like he doesn't watch movies with broken men and go, I think if I loved him just right, he would be all better.
So, oh my God, Lillian, that makes me now long for an adaptation where Jane is instead like John Eyre and it's a bromance. Like, wouldn't that be fabulous? Oh my God.
I would love, I mean, that would be like the drag brunch version of it, I think.
No, that'd be the really gay version of Jane Eyre.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Either way, I prefer to have my men broken in already.
Whoa.
I don't want to be the one to have to,
Sam wants a very submissive man.
I think we're going to have to put a new disclaimer at the beginning of this podcast that Sam says some of the dirtiest stuff that's ever been said on this podcast. And we
told you, I'm up to mischief.
Kill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So I interrupted you on your answers. So you said 2006 probably for the best.
2006 to get him to like it, I think. Either that or 2011. Because I feel like 2006, there's just so much to watch. Like, it's 4 hours. Where if I was trying to get somebody into it, I might have them watch the 2011. Because I also think when we talk about the balance between Gothic and romance, if you come to Jane Eyre for romance, watch the 2006 version. If you come for the complex story, I think there's some layers to that are interesting to watch that play out in a different way and within the 2 hours. In the 2011 version. So one of those two. Now, on the other hand, similar logic when it comes to length. If I wanted to torture Sam, torture per minute, the 97 is really going to get him there. Or not 97. I'm so sorry. 97, I apologize and I take it back and I will send a note to Syrian Hines today.
I was going to say, he's
57. 57.
That's the TV one?
The TV one. So it's an hour. Torture per
the
minute,
one with like a $4 budget. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. That one is
they
awful.
found on the couch.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
So where a drunk man tries to like molest a lady and they call it love.
Yeah. And then it's just her boss gets drunk and does try to like physically trap her on the stairs. It's fine. It's not something we should worry about. It's fine.
And then a man gets attacked at his party and he screams at everyone to keep dancing.
Well, that I can understand. Okay, you don't want to bring down the vibe. Yeah.
Sam, just like I wasn't going to give you a heads up on this, but I do have a moment planned at Piper's birthday party this weekend to push you down some stairs and then just yell at everyone to ignore you.
I would love to see you try, Lillian.
Lillian goes tumbling down the stairs instead.
Everyone's going to be like, how did Lillian wind up in a shallow grave in the backyard?
Oh my God.
Oh, you could never kill me.
It.
You could never kill me. I'm unkillable and you know that. You've tried before.
Last week we joked about Lillian interrupting our wedding because she found out there was a lady in the attic. Actually, more likely, someone else interrupts the wedding because they're like, in case you were wondering why Lillian isn't here, Sam killed her. She's buried in the backyard.
I know.
I'm glad this is the energy that I come into this show with. That you, like, listeners, I'm not a murderer.
He's a very good guy. He's wonderful.
Here's the thing. That's what a murderer and his fiance would say.
It's true. Yeah. I deny it around Piper in private.
Oh my God. I love it.
Every time you leave the room, he talks about his body count. And I used to think that's so gross that you're talking about all the women that you slept with. But I'm starting to think that it's a different kind of body count and you need to get out of there.
She finally figured it out.
Okay, so, I love this persona we've created for him.
So torture per
Me too.
Torture per minute. Torture per minute. It's the 57 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And great. I know I liked a lot of parts of this, but I think that all of the things that Piper kind of didn't like and I was able to overlook would drive Sam fully insane. And it's long. I would make him watch the 73.
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, I agree with that one. I think 73, because of the length, and it's one of my least favorite portrayals, is the hardest one. I agree with your torture answers. I think I agree in the most part for the to make him like Jane Eyre answers, but I'm also going to throw in, because you do really enjoy classic cinema, which is something I love about you. Not to be gross, but I would say watch the 54 version,
the Orson Welles
Welles one. I thought was really good because it had all of the 43. Sorry, thank you.
You're all good.
This isn't a podcast about math. Okay?
Numbers get out. It's about kisses and boys, and locking women in attics.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
But I think that one is just so beautifully filmed, acted, and it makes changes to the plot that I love.
Yeah.
So
that is honestly the one. Hearing you both describe that is by far the one that sounded the most interesting to me.
Cool.
Was the Orson Welles one. I would love I don't know, like I think Orson Welles is kind of a weird maniac, and I am really interested in just what that all entails.
Yeah.
in this story. Like, it's sort of like his entire life was method acting for a weird dude who gets his face burnt off and hides a woman in his attic, and just kind of a strange
But he
man.
did it.
Yeah.
I don't think they burnt his face, really, because it was such a good face. They scraggled it
and
for
that one-
sure.
yes, I think they maybe gave him. I can't remember. Did he have an eye patch?
They just put a little Band-Aid on his
I can't remember Orson Welles' face.
I don't
Or no,
think
I
he
think he just. He had he grew out his facial hair, and I think he just kind of stared off into the distance as if he couldn't see anything.
But they just made him grow a beard because that wasn't respectable.
All
Right.
of the Rochesters have the most unkempt beards, except for Patrick McWhatisnuts, because
That guy.
he got burned in a fire 2 seconds after she left, and then she came right back.
Well, also Timothy Dalton does not have a beard. He has a very edgy '80s scar on
And
his
a
face.
mullet.
Ooh.
Timothy
Yes,
Timothy has
yes.
a mullet.
He grew
Yeah.
a mullet out of depression.
A little sadness mullet. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Do we want to try and do some quick? Now I'd have to pull this off the top of my head because we haven't prepared anything.
You didn't even prepare.
Do we want to try and do a couple of quick quiz-like questions for Sam on Jane Eyre facts before we jump into talking about this adaptation? Because I feel like I won't be good at this because Sam is pretty good at remembering names, even half-handedly. So I think I've got to ask my first question for you.
I know all about broccoli. I know all about the other one.
Okay,
The
so
names are right up here somewhere.
So, Sam, can you tell me, let's start with a simple one. Can you tell me the name of the housekeeper?
Fairfax.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
How about
ward.
this? Can you tell me, can you tell me what is the name of Rochester's ward?
The little French girl?
Mm-hmm.
It is, oh my goodness. It is Estelle.
You're very
Oh.
close.
It's
Listeners, you got to know that Piper and I's faces were thrilled. There's nothing better than Sam being wrong.
We're very excited. Well, I was excited for your attempt.
You know what's funny about this is there's so many times when I'm listening where you guys are trying to think of the name of an actor, and I'm like, oh my God, it's
screaming
this.
at
I'm
us.
screaming. I'm literally dying.
That is
trying to
how.
listen to it.
That is fully how I picture you listening to our podcast. Is the whole time, because I told you guys this when you first started recording your podcast, World Forge.
Yeah.
I would listen to it,
Yeah.
and I told you, and I've listened to several of the episodes. It never gets better. The experience for me has always been my friends are having a conversation in the other room without me, and I just want to hang out with them.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad.
Cute.
And I imagine
Oh,
Sam's experience
course.
would be much more. My fiance and her friend are wrong, and I can't tell them because it happened in the past.
There have definitely been times where I've been listening to the podcast and I've texted Piper and I'm like, you fool, it was this all along.
Well, now that I know that you listen to almost every episode, I feel more inclined to talk about you on air because I'm like, Sam's gonna hear this later, and then I'll get off of recording and he'll come home for work and I'll be like, we talked about you today, and it's just like now you have to listen and find out.
I've listened to every episode except the most recent one. I haven't finished yet. I'm about halfway through it. I was frantically trying to get through it because you told me you roasted me, and I was like, I need to be able to address
Just a
this.
little
Because
bit.
there's
It was just
you
a
can handle
little
it.
roast. It wasn't nearly as
Just a
bad as
little
that time that you corrected me at our other friend's birthday party.
yeah.
And then I had to roast you probably for the rest of time. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, she roasted me via text right afterwards. She roasted me on her podcast.
Yes.
That's probably enough. No, it's my favorite new dining out story. Every
No,
time I'm chatting
of
with people,
course.
it's my small talk
Of
story.
course.
There you go.
The-
Perfect.
The classic counter roast.
Yeah.
Mhm.
and I'm here for it.
I
love the energy.
For our literary fans, just think of Lillian as a modern day Monte Cristo. She will not stop until she has her roasting revenge.
But I don't want to fight you. I will never fight you, Piper, especially not on your birthday, which I do feel like mentioning, because we're usually bringing our Friday energy to a Monday. I feel like this is a rare case where we're bringing Piper's birthday energy to almost 5 days before her birthday, because we're recording.
Who doesn't want to feel like a Monday on a Friday?
Well, exactly. No, and this actually kind of works well with like a joke that Sam and I have had for a long time. This is like the whole weekend leading up to this episode coming out will be essentially a birthday celebration, because we're getting together on Friday, a bunch of friends to party for my birthday, and then we're going to do random stuff over the weekend. But then Monday is my actual birthday. Today you're listening to it, and I'm going to have another nice birthday that day. But Sam, I think it was a few years ago, it just happened that different like friend groups and your family members, like throughout the months of like May and April, we just kept like doing stuff around my birthday. And you were like, will it never end? Like, she's been 27 for years now.
I think like a month later, my cousin posted a photo of us together that we had happened to have been at their place on their birthday, and I was like, it's been 83 years. Old Titanic lady. Well, I threw all of your diamonds into the ocean in protest.
Speaking of extended birthday celebrations, because this is, as you guys might be thinking that you're like, this is Air Buds, right? Like, this is where they talk about Jane Eyre. No, this is birthday podcast where we talk about Piper's birthday and other birthday related facts.
Hooray!
But speaking of belated birthday celebrations and just kind of like drawing out your birthday, this year Piper was unable to make it to my birthday party, which ended up being canceled because too many people couldn't come. And and a couple weeks later, we had plans.
Price is Right.
we had plans to make up for that, and Sam and Piper came to visit me. I live about an hour away from them, and have brunch with me and stuff. And we ended up meeting like 3 days before Sam's birthday to celebrate my birthday, and we did not celebrate Sam's birthday.
I stopped crying about 15 minutes ago, finally. Right before recording this podcast.
Yeah, I was like,
so glad I can make you cry again.
So basically what we're saying, guys, is that we only really get together if somebody's day of birth is within a recent proximity. So, yeah.
The obligation is necessary.
Exactly. We're like, well, they came into the world today. I guess we better see them. Anyway.
So why did we come together, Piper? Please tell me.
Well, it was actually Lillian's genius idea that we save this particular adaptation for my birthday, because when I was going through the list of adaptations on Wikipedia of all the different movies and shows that have done Jane Eyre, I was extremely excited to see that there is a version of Star Trek that has an episode that is linked in the Wikipedia. Now, at the time...
Kind of.
I was going to say, at the time, I thought it'd be way more Jane Eyre heavy. In fact, it is rather loosely based on Jane Eyre, but still a chance to talk about Star Trek and Jane Eyre, two of my biggest loves. So we saved this adaptation for today.
I think it's a big step for you that you would count Jane Eyre on the same level as Star Trek at this point.
Well,
that's how far you've come with this.
I would say that as far as like Jane Eyre and this podcast is a current obsession of mine. I have literally after we stopped recording every single week, Lillian and I look at each other and we smile and we're like, I love this. I'm having so much fun. And we'll text each other throughout the week to like send things for the Instagram and like updates. And we're always just like, this is the best. I just love my life.
We're just having the most fun.
Exactly. A big source of joy for me. And I also get that from Star Trek. But so yes, the version that we watched in preparation for this episode is from Star Trek Voyager. Mm-hmm. And I have a little description written up for people who are more romance fans than sci-fi fans, who do not really know anything about Star Trek or Voyager. So I've got a little intro for you. But I guess I should just jump into that. Maybe I should read that first.
It took us 23 minutes to talk about what we're here to talk about.
Okay.
Maybe lay a little bit of groundwork here.
Exactly. So, and this way I can sound more intelligent, because I wrote this up in advance, because it's something I care about deeply. So, for those of you who are not Trekkies or have a passing knowledge of Star Trek, Voyager is the 5th television series of the Star Trek franchise, and it is the first Star Trek show to feature a female commanding officer. Hooray! Captain Catherine Janeway, commander of the USS Voyager, which is one of the Galactic Federation's earliest Intrepid-class starships. It's a very technologically advanced ship for its time, which is significant because that plays a big role in the plot. Mm-hmm. So, during their first mission to locate and capture a Marquis resistance ship that went missing on the border of Cardassian space, Voyager and her crew were taken by a spatial array and pulled from the Alpha Quadrant of the to the Delta Quadrant on the other end of the galaxy. Essentially, this ship was just christened, and they're like, "Hey, you have to go and find these rebels." They went off to find the rebels, got sucked through a little wormhole, and popped out at the other end of the galaxy, far away from their friends and family.
Yeah, new ship. Who dis?
So. The entity that took them, known as the Caretaker, also captured the Marquis crew, that's these rebels that they were looking for, forcing the members of the Resistance and the Federation to work together in order to survive the ordeal. During this first adventure, the Caretaker died, and the technology that brought them there was destroyed. So now, Voyager and her crew of officers and outlaws are attempting to return to the Alpha Quadrant, although even traveling at maximum warp, which is the speed of which they can go, it will take them approximately 75 years before they finally return home. So, they have been shot to the other end of space where they don't know anybody or anything, and even traveling as fast as they can possibly be, it's going to be 75 years before they get back to anything that's familiar to them. So the whole setup of this show was really interesting, actually, because it's kind of a way for the writers to introduce brand new alien races. Because before, everyone knows all these other races that exist. We've got Klingons, we've got Vulcans, we've got humans, we've got Cardassians. Not Kardashians. Keeping up with them is very difficult in the galaxy.
They go faster than maximum warp. Yeah, it's impossible to keep up.
So by putting this Federation ship in this kind of new unexplored territory, now they can create new alien races, new conflicts, and introduce all kinds of other interesting plot points. Yeah. So that's where kind of the setting for our show. Captain Janeway is a very unique captain, apart from just being a lady. Like, what I've been watching the show in anticipation for this episode, and I'm now almost all the way through season 2. She's, I feel like, way more scientific than a lot of the other captains that we see. Yeah. Typically, captains like Picard or Kirk, they'll be briefed by their science officers and they will give input based on their leadership and experience. But Janeway is often right there alongside her engineers, coming up with, different solutions herself and staying toe to toe with all of the science that they're spewing out at her, which is awesome. She also, I think, brings a lot of compassion that we don't see from other captains, which is really nice too. And there's details about that I'm going to talk about when we get into the details of this specific episode. But I think maybe I should stop my ramble and we should pass over to Sam to give the classic, please try to summarize what happened in this adaptation as quickly and efficiently as you can.
That was a sick Easter reference, by the way, because it is almost Passover.
Wow.
Nice.
We got love, we got sci-fi, we got religion. Yeah. Go
Piper,
ahead,
my phone is dying. Can you record his time? Because it's really important to me that we know how long it took Sam to recap the whole episode.
Don't worry, it won't take long. It won't take long.
Samuel, the whole episode. I want the whole episode recapped.
Okay. I think it's also probably important to mention that if this version of Star Trek seems a little bit unfamiliar, Canadian listeners may know it as Star Trek Voyager. So,
oh my God.
Sure.
If you're not sure.
I've changed my mind.
This is what I live
Send
with.
Sam out of the room. Let's start again.
Okay, as soon as you start talking, I will press start.
Okay, all right. So, summary of this episode. Captain Janeway has a series of stress headaches while a strange alien takes turns gaslighting everyone on the ship, and there is vague references to Jane Eyre. The end.
Boop.
What a
11
terrible
seconds.
recap.
14
milliseconds. Not
milliseconds.
watch again.
I mean, that's really what it is. Like, okay.
I mean, as far as the competition goes for fastest, you certainly won that.
Sure.
So you did follow the assignment.
And also vaguest. So
this is classic Sam. Technically follows the rules. Technically won, but also did not do what he was supposed to do.
Anything.
Entertainment down significantly.
Okay, I can go a little more in depth here. Okay, so it starts out where Janeway is she's on the command deck, and they're talking about a meeting that she has coming up with a bosun emissary.
Oh, you remember this
embassy? Yes,
the name.
They're in uncharted space.
He is reading notes now, guys.
No, I'm not reading notes.
You just looked down at your paper.
No, I looked for the notes on my paper, and I saw there's too many notes. I can't see what's in there.
Okay.
No, my notes are a jumbled rat's nest of nonsense. She's meeting with a bosun emissary because they're in like space that is not, but belongs to the bosuns, and they need to essentially get their permission to go through this space. And as she's like preparing for this, she's super stressed out. She's kind of like having a hard time, and so the doctor says to her, "You should go and relax in your like holodeck stories." Weirdly, her holodeck relaxation is like she role plays as a character with the most stressful life imaginable, which is Jane Eyre, which is very strange to me.
I have a note about that too, because she was talking about her hollow stories, and she says she has a line in this episode where she's like, "It helps me unwind," and I'd be like, "Okay, typically, like you clearly didn't look into the story that you programmed because like this is not a stress-free story."
Well, and someone asks her that at some point. They say, "Hey, was that relaxing?" And she's like, "Kind of."
Yeah,
not really.
She's like, "I got some smooches. That was nice."
So she goes into her story, and she sees she sees what is vaguely a Jane Eyre-like story. Essentially, she's like a woman who works for a man who owns a house and has children and a governess.
Yeah, she is a governess to a lord.
And then starts seeing hallucinations of this holodeck drama in the real world. And she's kind of like, am I going crazy? What's going on? Am I ready to meet this bosun emissary? I don't really know what it is. And then as the story kind of progresses and she's trying to sort of figure this out, people start seeing, no, she's hallucinating, and it starts happening to other people on the ship as well. And eventually it kind of culminates with everyone is sort of locked into these hallucinations, and they have to figure out how to separate the reality from the hallucination and defeat this sort of weird alien force that is visiting these weird hallucinations upon them.
Yeah, no, I think
there's about 4 seconds of Jane Eyre in this.
the Jane Eyre influence in this is pretty small. And there was before this episode, there was lead up to this in 2 prior episodes where they kind of have establishing scenes of Captain Janeway in the holodeck, like playing around with this holo novel. And so like the first episode, we see her in the same kind of period accurate costume that we see her in this episode. And there she goes to the house. She's introduced to this guy who, instead of Mr. Rochester, this is a Lord Burleigh, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And she is going to be his governess. But before she meets him, she meets this very stern woman who I think is supposed to be a stand-in for Fairfax, but also sort of maybe a Grace
She's
Poole.
Also Bertha.
Well, they call her Mrs. Temple too, which is interesting.
Right.
That they give her a Jane Eyre name. No, they call her Templeton, which is really close to Miss Temple.
Yes. Yeah. And so we get a scene where Captain Janeway, just trying to enjoy her holodeck novel, gets threatened by this housekeeper, and she's like, everything was fine before you came along. And then that episode plays out without her being in the holodeck. And then we get another episode where she's back in her holo story, and here she's meeting the children, and it's this cute moment of her kind of practicing, like, well, how will I introduce myself to them? Like, no, that's too formal, and that's too casual. And then the kids walk in, and it's this little lord and this little lady, and the boy is super strict, and she's like, all right. And the little girl is like nice, and she's talking to them. She's like, so I'm sorry. Oh, she's meant to be spooky. Yes. In this previous episode, she was nice. But yeah, it's meant to be. So she, says to them, she's like, I'm sorry, your mom passed away. And in that scene, the little girl's like, no, I talked to my mom last night. And her brother's like, shut up. No, you didn't. Like, my mom's been dead. My sister is just like, has grief. And so she doesn't know what she's talking about. So that's kind of like laying the seeds of, instead of, we've got Bertha locked in the attic and Adele is a ward, it's simply children. And for whatever reason, the master of the house is pretending that his wife is dead. Yeah. But she's upstairs.
And we get no closure on that.
No,
not at all.
Like, why? Why is this happening?
The holo drama just ends.
Yeah.
Like with no, it's okay. Can I like list off my commonalities that I found with
Sure.
Jane? Okay. 1, a woman named Jane smooches a man.
Yes.
2, there is no pilot, but during one of Janeway's hallucinations, she hears a dog barking, and there is a picture of a dog on her desk.
Yes, that is her beloved boy. Is back home on Earth.
A strange woman tries to kill her.
Uh-huh.
Several men have their faces burned off.
Mm.
That's about all I could get.
Honestly,
there's
the men getting their faces burnt off is like probably the most important thing to be accurate to Jane Eyre.
That's the biggest part. So there's a lot of gaslighting.
Yes.
Okay, so like I think that was kind of an interesting part of this experience is as I was watching this, like it was pretty quickly apparent that there wasn't really a lot of like I was kind of expecting there to be like, okay, we all go into the holodeck, and every member of the crew is going to play a different character in Jane Eyre.
That would be fun.
Like, we're going to like kind of over it. So that didn't really happen, right? And thinking about that makes sense because it would be weird if like if Picard was like, all right, Riker, you're going to role play this man that I'm in love with. And then afterwards, we're just going to go back to being crewmates. And like, you know, like that would have been kind of a strange thing.
Here's an important question that I have. At what point did you realize that this was not gonna like? At what point did you go, "This is gonna be an episode of Star Trek, not a Jane Eyre adaptation"? Because I know the exact moment that I went, "Oh, this is different, huh?"
Well, I pretty much like as soon as the first like holodrama section ended, I was kind of like, "Oh, we're going somewhere else." Like,
yeah. Lillian, what was the moment for you?
My moment was because I kept waiting. I mean, we've all seen episodes of TV shows where they kind of take all the characters and put them in something else, or they take one of the characters and they go do something completely else. So I kept waiting for that moment to happen. And the moment that I was like, oh, she's not gonna, because I thought she was going to get trapped in the book. I don't know why I thought she was going to get trapped in this hallucination thing. Like, that's what I thought. I
kind of thought something similar.
That'd be fun.
And we can just rewrite it. It'll be fine. We do it with everything else. But when I saw her, like, she goes back at one point, because after she sees some of the hallucinations in the, like, real world, out of the hollow novel, which is what she was watching. She goes back in her regular clothes, and he immediately like comments on it. And then he goes to kiss her, and she goes, pause. And then she goes, delete character. And I'm like, you just deleted Mr. Rochester. Oh my God.
I said the same thing. I was like, she just killed that man. Like, he's dead. And I thought the clothes thing was so funny too. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I felt like in a meta sense, I think what happened was they had her in the first scene, which was like 30 seconds long. They had her in this kind of old-timey period dress. And then the next time they show her, they just have her in the normal Starfleet uniform. And I was like, was the first costume a rental or something? Did they have to give it back? And they were just like, it was just too much effort to put her in that again. So
it made sense to me. It made sense to me that she, like, when she went to go relax and when like she's doing the thing, she fully cosplays, right? Like she's like in it.
Yeah.
And then it made sense to me that when she's in a panic, she doesn't change her clothes before she goes into the ship.
That's
like
a good point.
That makes sense. Well, the part that didn't make sense to me is, why is he noticing that she's not wearing regular clothes? Like, does she? So she has to cosplay to read her book.
Just program him not to notice.
That's the thing, Lillian. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's like the more Star Trek you watch, there's like a ton of episodes where people do just like holodeck-centric episodes. And so I love that in this one, we see her before she enters the holodeck. She's in her quarters wearing that costume. So I previously, as a novice Star Trek watcher, assumed that when you walked onto the holodeck, it would maybe like essentially put hollow clothes on you. But it doesn't. When they dress up like that, they use the fabricators aboard the ship to create these costumes. But that doesn't put them on their bodies. So she had to like have somebody maybe help her with the corset and like do all of that and like style her hair a certain way. So I do think it's really interesting, both that element that we see where it's like, yes, this is a really full commitment, and also hilarious to me that it's like Starfleet regulation that in your off time on a starship, everyone is encouraged to cosplay and role play on the holodeck and just like go and live out your fantasies. But let me just say real quick, it's also very interesting. Yes, you do see in many other renditions where the holo characters will comment on your attire if you are not dressed period accurately. But I think it's all about programming. Some people program their own hollow stories. So if Janeway had taken the time to program this, I'm sure no one would say anything about it.
Yeah.
But I think she's using, a pre-scripted story in the catalog.
Here's something that I feel is important to mention for context for our listeners. I have watched two or three, I think just two Star Trek movies of like the modern ones, like the Chris Pine ones. And otherwise, this was my first episode of Star Trek.
Oh my God. Congratulations, Lillian.
I was watching this and I just kept being like, dang. And to be clear, though, I do watch a lot of sci-fi things. So it's not, I wasn't like shocked by like, but there was so much jargon. Like, it's one of those things where like, I usually watch sci-fi things from like the beginning. So the jargon starts, like they kind of ease you into it. So I watch like a lot of Doctor Who. I can speak Whovian if people say stuff. I get it. I've watched arguably too many times the Star Wars movies, but like Star Trek just haven't done it. So I dove into because I don't know if you saw my face. Sam didn't, and our listeners obviously didn't. But when Piper was doing her recap of like, what is Star Trek Voyager? I was blown away. That story was crazy.
Well, even as I was writing it up, I was like looking at both the Wikipedia, and then they have all of this like Star Trek wiki and all kinds of other things to get the details right. And I'm like, I want to go into so much more detail, but I'm afraid it will bore everyone. Yeah. So I tried to simplify.
Okay, so I actually have, I think a couple of sort of fun little activities here, right? Because there was so little Jane Eyre to this, I found myself kind of trying to brute force Jane Eyre into it. Like I was trying to be like, okay, what are ways where I can really like push the boundaries of like overlaying Jane Eyre onto this? Because I think there were some interesting kind of parallels you could draw. Like I actually thought there were a few points where people were like, Janeway, go to the hospital, like go to the med bay, like you need to stay there. And I was kind of like, that's sort of like locking Bertha in an attic because she's going crazy a little bit. Like, like I think there were some like soft parallels there. I think it was kind of fun a little bit as an exercise to be like, where are even the most like pedantic, silly little kind of tie-ins there? Like, was there anything that stood out to either of you as like, oh, this is definitely not intentionally a Jane Eyre reference, but like I can kind of draw conclusions here?
Well, I have an answer to that, but it's definitely going to change the tone because I feel like here you've got like kind of like a fun, goofy thing, but I've actually like put on my critical analysis hat, and I've got like, I think there are quite a few scenes here that like kind of draw similar themes to themes that are explored in Jane Eyre. And the one that I mostly picked up on is, so we see Captain Janeway looking at a photograph of this guy and a dog, and the dude, he's not her boyfriend. He's like literally referred to like as her lover. He's like this
Mark,
a friend that she has a romantic relationship with, and he is like now hundreds of years away back on Earth, and so he is part of the hallucination that's brought forth. Like when she's walking around on the ship, she does see hallucinations of the Jane Eyre story, but then also she sees Mark. And because this alien is trying to essentially like get everyone to kind of get into this, I don't know, comfortable dream state so he can take over the ship or do other things.
They don't really say what his end goal is.
He wants them to leave his space. So I think that was part of it, is that he could like take control of the ship.
Could have just told them to leave.
He did it because he could, Sam.
Leave.
He says it right
at
the
the end. No, you're right. Yeah. He does. He says, I did it because I could. You're absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah, he just has fun playing with people.
Yeah.
But so we see...
I get it.
So Janeway, when she starts hallucinating...
I'm so sorry, Piper. We need to unpack what Sam just said, which is, I get it.
Yeah.
Sam explained.
Yeah, Sam also likes to mess with people.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Like, if you want to just mess
get
with
out.
People.
He for
Lillian.
sure. Have you checked the attic, Sam?
Lillian,
have you checked the attic?
I literally... Literally, like the first thing I said when I came on this air, when we started recording, I said, my number one goal when I guess in a podcast is mischief.
Throw people off kilter.
Okay,
yeah.
fine.
No,
Sorry,
also,
Piper.
Totally get that.
Also, Lillian, I feel like you, as Sam's technical friend, should have known him long enough now that if Sam was, I assume, to be an eternal alien with telepathic abilities in space by himself, what else would he do other than mess around with people that he comes across?
1,000%.
He wouldn't do
be
it.
cute.
I guess in my heart of hearts, despite everything I know about him, I thought Sam was a good person. And I thought he wouldn't torture people. I thought maybe he'd like just kind of like do a prank and then leave.
Dude, but so many of the
fun prank.
so many of the hallucinations that people had were their greatest fantasies.
That's a good point. Having your face burned off. Super fun fantasy.
No. So he only did that when the people were trying to like resist his his delusions. But like, so for example, for Janeway to try and pacify her, he has her see her love interest Mark, and they're like making out in the elevator, which is called a hololift.
It's a little fucked up though.
But no, so like that's kind of actually where this theme was that I was gonna draw on is, so when she sees Mark and she knows it's a hallucination and she's trying not to give into it, he says to her when he's confronting her, he's like, "Is that fair to me?" When he says, you know, you were making out with another man in this holodrama, and it's like you were having this romantic fantasy with somebody else. I'm on Earth waiting for you, and here you are not being
like
just
emotionally
for me,
faithful or something,
right? And I think that's something that I was drawing lines there with, like, how does Bertha feel, you know, locked in her tower with windows where she can look out and see her husband pursuing this governess on the grounds of their house, and having a woman brought up in a wedding dress in front of her suddenly being like, "I'm trying to marry this girl." And you're like, Jesus Christ.
That's a really interesting parallel.
I actually also had some notes about that, and I really wanted to know what your guys' thoughts were on, like, and especially since you guys are in a relationship, so like pressure's on, baby. First question is, do you think that those holo novels would be cheating? And then follow-up question, where would the line be then in terms of like consuming fiction?
Ooh, that is a very intense question.
I think we both have a pretty similar answer for this, because I mean, coming from like a very trusting relationship, I don't know. I think people need like outlets for fantasy. I think that's really important. Like, let's get gross for a moment here. No, I don't know. I think if there's like trusting communication there, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know that like you have a podcast about Jane Eyre. I know that you're a big fan of smut.
Hey now, there's a big difference.
Jane Eyre.
Okay.
No, there's a huge difference between romance and sexy romance.
I read a lot of smutty books. This is not smutty.
yeah. No, I think that's like, as long as there's like openness and communication, I think that's a super healthy and honestly kind of important thing about any relationship, is being able to be open about that kind of thing. And like, if there are, it's very different, I think, for someone in a situation like Janeway's, where, you know, she's 73 years away from the person, you know, she has no way of communicating with a person and being like, hey,
is it cool if I make out with this holo guy?
This is like a need that I have that maybe isn't fulfilled by this relationship or something, but like, you know, like, can we fulfill this in like a safe way for both of us or whatever? Like, I think that is a really interesting sort of gray area for that. Just like kind of, you can get into a conversation about like, you know, consent and comfortability and trust and all that.
So I think with everything, it depends. And it's all about like the communication and talking with your partner, if you are like in a committed relationship, to say like, what are you comfortable with and what do I feel that I need and everything. I think the difference between what someone, you know, does on a holodeck versus like what we have now is that it is a more like immersive kind of like real life thing. And so I think it would be very different. Like, that's for everyone to talk with each other and figure out what everyone's comfortable with.
Because they've established,
I don't think I'd be happy if Sam was going off and making out with a holo lady. I'd be like, no, that's not cool. I know she's just code, but still.
Well, that's why I returned my PlayStation VR.
Yeah.
With the kissy lips attachment.
Kissy lips attachment.
They've established like the kissy lips. Oh my God. They've established like the doctor as his own character, right? Like he's his own, he feels like a character on the show. And so then that's where I was kind of going like, because the first thing that he says, like, how is that fair to me? I was like, well, she's a book. Like, that's a book. And like, but then if they're saying that, like, this is real enough that you have to wear the right clothes because he genuinely, she's not acting out a play. He's responding to her. Like, that's like two-way. It's like, and so then it's a different layer to me of like where that is. And like, it's not a TV show. It's not a movie. It's not some video. It's like, there's more to it. And I just find that really interesting. And I think to your point and bringing it back to the theme of Jane Eyre, there's also the layer of because like I said, I went in super blind into this. I didn't know she was 75 years away from her lover. And so that's another question of like, does Rochester owe Bertha any level of faithfulness as her husband? Does Captain Janeway owe her husband being faithful to him? And does he owe her being faithful to her when he presumably doesn't know if she's dead or alive? Like,
right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And they will probably never see each other again.
I think something that's so interesting about that is like there's sort of this like Lillian, you're talking about, is she playing a role that's someone else? Like, is she going into the holodeck to say, I am playing Jane Eyre, or I'm going into the holodeck to play Janeway, like in a story that reacts to me? And, you know, like, is there this, am I existing in this sort of like liminal space between like me, a person, and a character that I admire, or that has like a freedom that I wish I had, or that, you know, that has some kind of a space that it would be fun to inhabit for a little while? Or am I trying to fulfill like some need that I have in the real world that's not being fulfilled, like for me, you know, like personally? Like, is there this abstraction there, or is it like a direct like need that's being fulfilled?
Exactly. And that's the interesting thing, is that so many characters use the holodeck in so many different ways. And I think it's really interesting whenever there is a holodeck based episode, the plots that they explore. Just quick tangent, there's in the show The Next Generation, there's an entire episode with this one character. I think his name is Berkeley. I don't like this character. I think he's too snivelly and cowardly and awkward, and I think he's annoying. He actually shows up in this show. But there's an entire episode.
He also got warped to the Delta Quadrant.
There's an entire episode in which it deals with holodeck obsession or holodeck addiction. He becomes addicted to using the holodeck, and what he does is, which crosses a line for a lot of the crew members.
Is he holoaddicted?
Yes, he has programmed female characters who look identical to female crew members that he works with. So when gross. Exactly. So when he goes into the holodeck, he sees these ladies that he works with, and they are romantic characters towards him. And somebody finds out about that, and they're like, that's not okay. And he's like, but it's fake. It's not hurting anybody, and nobody knew about it until now. And they're like, it's still not okay. And it's an entire episode kind of expressing where he's like, he's not showing up to work because he's too obsessed with being in the holodeck and living out these fantasies. And it's very interesting.
That is really interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's a similar, like, that's kind of a similar question that I'm curious about. Like, is like, so obviously I think we agree that it's not okay that he programmed his coworkers in a program where it's that realistic. Like, that's not okay. What if he wrote stories about them? Like, what if he wrote like romantic short stories? Even if they weren't dirty, like, is that okay? Like, okay, what if he like published romantic short stories about his coworkers? What if he had a podcast where he told romantic short stories about his coworkers and hired actresses to like voice them? Like, that's I mean, all of those seem pretty messed up to me, but there is a line where it stops being like, that's just weird versus that's gross. And like, it feels similar to me, like, okay, if she is herself, like if she is herself and that character is reacting, and Jane is reacting to Janeway, and he like is real enough that he notices the difference in her clothing. I don't know. That feels more on one side of the line than the other, because to Sam's point, like, obviously everything's about communication, but open relationships are about communication too, right? Like, that's not really the question. It's like, is this real? And at what point does it stop being real? Because I think reading a book, it's not real.
No, I think there's a really interesting, I think that brings up a really interesting conversation about like, if you as like a creator, like you create a character, you create a story or whatever, like whether it's based on something in the real world or not, like do you own, like in what way do you own that idea? Like if I am inspired to create a character based on Piper, and someone can read that and see like this is clearly based on Piper, like is she losing like control over her own image because I am like using this to create something else, like I think there's sort of this like death of the author thing that can kind of come in there. Like I think that's really, really interesting. That do you as a creator have free reign to create whatever you want without consequence, regardless of how it affects people, or are you responsible for the way that people will maybe interpret the world that you create and how it will affect the people that may have been intentionally or unintentionally kind of brought into that? Like, I think that that's like a fascinating conversation because in this example, I think that's clearly, we know someone who's been in a situation like this where someone wrote like a sexy story about them and it was like a gross, unpleasant experience for them. And they said, please don't do this about me. Yeah. I'm not interested in being involved in this. Right.
Yeah. That person was using that for malicious intentions.
Yeah. And exactly. Yeah. And like, is it like the line there is like, how do you possibly define that? Right. Yeah. How do you say like, well, it's okay if I don't use your name, but if it's still inspired by a real person, like maybe the name isn't what matters, right? Like you're still taking some kind of like agency or consent away from a person if you're doing this. Like, I don't know. That's a very complicated topic. And I think it's kind of a fascinating question to ask.
Oh yeah. No, I love that we've taken our romance adaptation critique podcast and brought it back to all of my like ethics in journalism classes from college. Cause there we get into, issues of libel, of saying like, if you create a person, but you say, well, it's just a parody of Tom Cruise, so I can make fun of it. It's fine. But you're defaming him or doing all kinds of stuff. Like, how do you rule against that?
I think generally speaking, kind of gross.
I think for the most part.
I think there's a lot of like...
For the most part, just don't do it. But
if you are able to write like the greatest like masterpiece the world has ever known, and there's like value to the work that you're creating, and you're, an incredible author who respects the person or the content that they're pulling inspiration from, like, then okay, sure, like maybe there's artistic license afforded there. But as just like a person trying to like live out your own fantasies, tread very lightly, my friend. Like, I don't know. Like,
yes, indeed.
Yeah. That's a really interesting conversation.
So sorry, I just have one more thing about holo novels. And I think it's pretty important. I really want to read books like that. That sounds so much fun. Not even like the sexy ones, just like every book I've ever read, I'm like, this
you can just walk into it. Right. No, it's like, I feel like the closest we can get to that is if you go to like Harry Potter universe and you're a Harry Potter fan and you get to walk through Diagon Alley and have that immersive experience. There's definitely a huge appeal. And I'm glad this technology is not readily available, because I feel like I worried that I would lose my job and break my relationships, because I'd be like, but I can fly on a Banshee and just live on Pandora in Avatar Land, and it's great, and I love it here. And it's like, whatever you want can just be a thing.
It reminds me of, I read a lot of books. I consume a lot of content about books. And there's this girl that I follow on TikTok.
Books about books.
Who, she had this video where she was like, people keep telling me that there's nothing I can get in books that I can't get in the real world. And I'm just wondering, where are the dragons? And that's how I feel about this conceptual like holo novel thing. It's like, I'm sorry, if dragons are real and I can ride on their back with no risk to myself, right? Like, I don't want to actually be in a lot of these books, but I want to play them out in a very safe space for me. Yeah, that sounds fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good way to kind of maybe like wrap this part of this discussion up, is that like, I think fantasy is really important. And I think that like people need outlets to be able to explore things that you can't explore in the real world. And like, whatever that means for any given person is going to be very, like, I'm not going to try to define that for anyone. Right.
Right.
But like, I think it's really important to be able to have safe spaces to say like, okay, this is not an okay thing to talk about in the real world, but like, let's have a moment to explore this, see how it makes me feel. and can I bring this into the real world or not? Like, I think that's a really valuable thing for people to be able to have. And
you talking about it as like a valuable resource like that. They even address that in this episode, where when Captain Janeway seems stressed and overworked, it is the doctor's order that he's like, you need to go and take a vacation. And when you're trapped on a starship in the middle of nowhere, that means go to the holodeck and do whatever it is that relaxes you. Whoops, she chose the wrong book. But
choose the most stressful book imaginable.
To talk about this show again, and that specifically, when the doctor says it's a doctor. Obviously, that's different. I found that somewhat frustrating that the show decided that the woman just like couldn't handle it. But every other character, she did not seem frazzled. Like, I'm just going to be totally honest. She seemed a normal amount of stressed. And but like, they didn't play up her being like super frazzled, like not handling things, like whatever it was. But all of these characters saying to her, like, you seem not okay, when she just like, it felt very similar to like guys being like, you seem really tired when you're not wearing makeup. And like, that's the first time they've ever seen you not wearing makeup. And I was like, if I was her, one more person said it to me, I'm bitch slapping them across the bridge. Like, you got to be kidding me.
Oh my God.
Leave her alone.
I think the difference, so I would agree with you within the context of like viewing this as a bubble, but the way that we see Janeway at the beginning of this episode, she's way more like kind of harsh and snappy than we typically ever see her in the show. Yeah. So that's why characters are like, this isn't like you, Janeway.
And we talked about it because we were watching it and I was like, she seems like tense. Like, is this how she normally is? Because like, I didn't really have that. I hadn't seen a lot of Star Trek Voyager leading up to this, but I remember
You're not Jean-Luc Picard.
I remember like as a kid, like watching episodes like here and there with my dad and thinking like, oh, like Janeway is pretty, like she's very like straightforward and she's very like put together and like has this kind of like seriousness to her, but not like a terseness necessarily.
Yeah.
And I asked you, I was like, she seems like, is she like upset? Like, is this like the normal like characterization for her? And you're like, no, like something seems like kind of off about this. And I thought that was kind of interesting that like she was dealing with a very stressful situation and I didn't feel like she was like dealing with it in an unreasonable way. But I, like not knowing the character, I think it was interesting that like, to your point, like, I don't think there was anything about the way that she was acting that was unreasonable at all. But I wasn't sure if that was like the normal characterization of Janeway or if that was like a thing that was like kind of out of place or like a different
I think we'll have
portrayal
to cede it to Piper on this one since she is our Voyager expert.
I would also to say, like, for the sake of plot and like in the meta writing of this episode, I think a lot of it was like set up both to get her to go into the holodeck and justify why we're spending so much time there, but then also because similar to in Jane Eyre, where we get several red herrings of, is there a mad woman in the attic, or is like the house haunted? At first, we think maybe Janeway, she's like, well, maybe I'm just so tired that I'm seeing things and I really need to sleep. Yeah. But actually, they also have a setup at the beginning of the episode where they're trying to make it so that the holographic projectors are all over the ship. Because at present, they only exist in the med bay so that the holo doctor can show up there. So they're trying to put it all over the ship so that he can go and help people when they can't be taken to sick bay. And so that is also kind of a red herring because it's like, oh, well, maybe these new projectors they're setting up are casting these holo characters into the outside of the holodeck, like into the ship. Yeah. And so there's all kinds of red herrings of what this is before the telepathic alien is like, it was me. And you're like, damn you, alien, get out of here.
I have a really important question that I think we're all going to agree with.
I've interrupting you a lot, please. Please do. Yeah.
I think it's important that we ask the most. This is a question that I bolded in my notes because I really needed to know from Piper. How true is this?
Yes.
Is her hair always like that? Is that her like normal hairstyle? Because it's a very Jane
I have
hairstyle.
Notes about this too. Yes, I have notes about this too.
The big updo?
Yeah.
I literally wrote bonnet watch Janeway's hair. Does this count?
Oh my God, cute Sam. Yes, that is the typical Janeway style of having it like big and coiffed up like that. But what's funny is sometimes when you see her hair down, it looks like a bob that only reaches her shoulders. But then sometimes when it's down, it like goes down to her back and is in this like fancy ponytail.
That would be a really tough hairstyle to pull off with hair only to your shoulders, because she has like a whole intricate bun then as well.
Yeah, it's very intricate.
Exactly.
It looks like a bonnet. It's tied up into, like, I was like, that was for this episode, right? Because she's doing like an old-timey, like,
nope, that's how her hair is.
Thing, and I'm
typically.
Like, what? Yeah.
I think in later seasons, she just does the kind of like shoulder length kind of bob style. Okay. But right now it is really long and she just has it kind of pulled up like that.
Because that was a question that I had, because I was looking at it and I was going, okay, obviously, because we talk a lot about how these adaptations are products of the time, right? And like that is one thing that like this is still a product of the time trying to tell a story about a different time. Like, so the idea, what year is this in the fantasy? Is the 21st century, the 22nd century, the 23rd? What is this supposed to be? Star Trek?
just keep naming centuries eventually.
Future.
Oh my God, I would have to look it up.
Okay.
I think it's 23rd.
Okay.
Something like that.
It's supposed to be future, because I realized when I said 21st, that is the century we're currently.
That's now. It's actually a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
It's supposed to be a long time from now in a galaxy far, far away.
Yes.
Which is the biggest difference between Star Wars and Star Trek. But
yes.
So she, her hairstyle was so interesting to me because it's supposed to be the future. So there's like little elements to the way that obviously the uniform and all the stuff and the way that the people dress, that is supposed to be futuristic. There's like hairstyles and things that are supposed to be the future. But then there's also things that are supposed to be this fictional Regency, Victorian, whatever era back in time. And then we also are seeing the 90s. And bizarrely, while I was staring at her hair, I was like, that could be any of those three. Like, it's fairly period accurate for Jane Eyre. It is also very 90s. And it seems a little futuristic. Like, how does it do all three?
There's like a retro futurism aspect of it, but there's also like a retro periodism aspect of
I think it's really funny that throughout all of the Star Trek shows, the way that they approach hair is something that they do to try to be like, we're in the future now. So like, I think Janeway's style is supposed to be sort of futuristic because we see in later episodes there are other like science officers who have a similar kind of coif going on. Yeah. The thing that I think is hilarious, and I stare at it every time I see it, is that apparently a future hairstyle in Star Trek is guys who have pointed sideburns. All sideburns have a little point to it. That's what they do in the future. Yeah. But like in the original series, like their way of showing like futuristic stuff, they had a lady for a while who just had like a beehive, but her hair was like woven into like a net. And it was like, they're like, this is how people wear their hair in the future. And I'm like, you're really stretching here, guys.
So
I feel like the future thing is just, you know, sure, the costume designer was like, I don't know, probably there'll be a machine that'll turn a 4-hour haircut into a 4-minute haircut. You know what I mean? Like, just take a really complicated haircut and make it accessible. That's the future. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and it seems similar to me, like we've talked about, where it's like when you watch certain things, they don't necessarily seem in the moment like they're representative of the time when it's a period piece. Like, I didn't watch the 2005 Pride and Prejudice and go, this is very 2005. But now when I watch it, I'm like, that's very 2005, boys and girls.
Yeah.
And I feel very similarly to when you watch the 83 with Timmy D, you're not sitting there going, damn, Timmy D has a very 80s haircut, until you get to the mullet. And then you're like, what do you mean he got burned in a fire and his hair suddenly became 80s chic?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Okay. I have a question for each of you, actually. A question tailored for each of you. Lillian, I'm really interested. I'll start with you, because I know that you're not a fan of spooky things. And I felt that this episode, it was kind of like a psychological thriller. It was kind of spooky a little bit. To me, it felt like if David Fincher directed a Jane Eyre movie or something like that. I'm curious, like, was that something that was sort of like, how did you feel about that? Like, was this something that you felt was like kind of spooky and scary? Like, did you think it was like sort of Jane Eyre as a thriller or something like that?
No, I didn't.
I mean, Jane Eyre is already a thriller in its own.
Yes,
the biggest thing is there are parts of adaptations of Jane Eyre that do spook me. Like, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
But it's the like ghost spookiness. I think because I'm fairly familiar with sci-fi stuff, and I will say there's often parallels drawn between Star Wars and Star Trek. I actually didn't feel that nearly as much as I did Doctor Who and Star Trek. Like, there's a lot of episodes of Doctor Who that seem very scary until you think about the fact that this is a mid-season episode. There's no way that anybody's going to die. Like, this is fine. Like, that's how I felt. Like, it felt very much more like a, in the best way, with all the love in the world, cheesy sci-fi thing. So with romance books and with sci-fi things like of this sort of genre and vibe, I don't really get spooked as much as I do with other things. So that's kind of my main deal, to answer your question, Sam.
That's good.
I just really wondered because like, I don't know, like I was curious. This seemed like surprisingly kind of horror thriller-ish to me.
Yeah. No, I liked the tension of this episode, but I also, to comment on your previous note, Lillian, I think this era of Star Trek TV still very much has that kind of, is this a sci-fi from the BBC feel, where it's like they have a bit of a CGI budget, but most of it's a lot of, alien prosthetics and costumes. And it is interesting how often an entire episode, like every episode almost feels like a bottle episode, because literally in the last one, I've already seen 3 episodes of the show where the main character dies, but they have the technology to bring them back to life again. And then the next episode, they're walking around like nothing ever happened. And no one ever is like, he's like, hey, remember how last week the Vulcan, he just like lost his mind and wanted to like murder everybody? Well, now he's totally fine.
Wasn't that weird?
That was so weird. I also just said Vulcan, like a weirdo. He's a Vulcan, not a Vulcan. Oh my God. Forgive me, Tuvok. Live long and prosper, my friend.
Yeah.
Okay. So
the before I ask the question ahead of you, the one kind of thing I'm interested to confirm is I feel like there were 2 moments in this episode, Piper, where you audibly gasped.
Yes.
And it was, I feel as though they were definitely, I think they like struck a chord with you.
I can think of one of them. I'm not sure what the other one was.
One was when Tuvok saw his wife and was like, I'm just an emotionless but not truly Vulcan, like who suddenly is confronted with all this emotion, like that overwhelming sort of like I felt like that was a big thing for you. The other one when Malala, is that her name?
B'Elanna.
B'Elanna
Torres.
Yes, B'Elanna had that interaction with Chakotay where she was like, "You're not Chakotay," and he was like, "I'm the Chakotay you want me to be."
Exactly.
Like, both of those moments, you let out an audible gasp.
Dude,
and I was like,
very
good.
Like, that was very good. So little context. Yeah. So the delusions that these 2 characters saw, Tuvok, who is a Vulcan, which if you are unaware, they use meditation to suppress all emotion because they're purely logic based. But
that doesn't mean they don't experience emotion.
They experience emotion very deeply. They just don't express it. But so he is married and has children who live on the Vulcan homeworld. But as with everyone else, he's 7,500 years away from them, light years. Yeah. And so the delusion to get him on the alien side is that he sees his wife on the screen. And even briefly, he has this like hallucination that he is back on their homeworld. So that made me emotional because I love whenever Vulcans have romance. Because I'm just like, oh my God, yes.
Piper gets pretty hard for Vulcans.
I do. I love them so much.
Although actually, don't Vulcans have like extended life? Isn't like 73 years for a Vulcan not a big deal?
Oh yeah. I mean, he's at least 100 years old, but it's still a long time away from his family. I guess, So he's just happy to see his wife
for 100 years and see how you feel about it.
I'm not a Vulcan.
You'll live.
It's not the same.
I'm going to use my magic. You'll live. Piper won't experience you being gone at all. She'll be fine. You will experience everything.
Okay.
All right, great.
Thank you, Lillian, for sparing me in this experiment.
It's your birthday. How could I not?
That's right. And then the other context is so with B'Elanna Torres, to distract her, she has a fantasy that her superior officer is like seducing her, which is very interesting and very nothing that we've seen before for these characters. So to see that, I was like, oh my God, is this secretly what she wants? Because like that was the idea. And actually, Sam, that leads really well into the point that I wanted to make later about this, is that at the end of this episode, B'Elanna and Janeway are having this conversation in the mess hall. And B'Elanna's like not saying exactly what she experienced, but she's like, I had a delusion and it was exciting, but also I don't think that's what I want. And should I feel ashamed of the things that I saw and the things I was confronted with? And she asks, she's like, do you think he was actually reading our minds? Or do you think he was just making us think we wanted these things? Which is a very interesting idea. It's like, was I confronted with my actual desires, or was he making me believe this is what I wanted? And Janeway says something after thinking for a while where she's like, perhaps it is better to look those feelings in the eye than to keep them locked up inside. And I think that's a very Jane Eyre kind of thing, because here we could look at this both from, maybe that's Rochester's point of view of saying, screw the laws of man. I know I love Jane and I'd rather like express that and be with her than keep it locked away. But then also clearly with the locking away like wording, we could also look here too at, you know, how Bertha is treated. And it's like, should she be free and not just like your secret? Like, should you live publicly with this woman and own your oath that you made to her?
I think that's so interesting that that's your read from that, because I have in my notes here that I felt that was kind of the most Jane Eyre moment of it, was that sort of like, we finally sort of unleash our emotions a little bit in kind of a sexy way.
Oh my God.
And I don't know, like I sort of love that it's like, no, like we have to be open and honest about this. And I think maybe I do understand Jane Eyre a little bit after all.
Oh,
wow. Sam did
the freeze frame and the little 90s piano plays out.
No, I felt like that moment of it to me was kind of like, this is sort of the this sort of like, there's sort of this forbidden love and like finding a way to communicate this thing that like, you know, you're not really allowed to talk about, or that society is like kind of preventing you from talking about in a really honest or open kind of way. I felt like that was, again, like I said earlier, finding ways to like force Jane Eyre into this and like map it over it. I thought that felt like a very Jane Eyre moment.
I also want to draw in too that, so it also brings to mind the conflict that Jane faces when Rochester places this tempting offer before her after the truth is revealed. It's like, should we allow ourselves to live in the fantasy? Like Jane could also say, screw you, society, and run off with this man that she loves and live in a house in Paris, in France, or whatever. Or do we stick to our responsibilities and do what we think is right, which is what the crew of Voyager decided to do to fight back against these romantic delusions, as does Jane Eyre in the end.
Well, I think that's really interesting. I think that's really cool.
Lillian, do you have a take or an input on this before we dive into my question?
I think you nailed it. I 100% agree. I think that's like such an interesting point. And it's one of the things that when I first watched Jane Eyre, you get so, I think we've talked about this before, you get so caught up in the buck wild plot of this book and story that you miss these nuances. Like, you're like, no. I actually don't care that it's a metaphor because a woman's in an attic and maybe this guy sucks and we're supposed to fall in love with him. And then the more that I watch it in this context and the more that I'm like looking for that nuance, the more interesting that it is and like how that plays out. And I think it's one of the cool things about watching things with this lens. Like it's interesting to watch something where I think the three of us had a little bit of a group chat panic of like, that wasn't Jane Eyre. And it's so interesting to see that the themes still hold true though. And that there's still these like really interesting pieces. And I think you have one more, right, Piper, of these themes?
Oh no, that was it.
Wow. So we're just going to right away.
Piper,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Sam's got a question for me, and then I've got some production notes.
But I think you're right though, Lillian. Like it's kind of cool to see that like Jane Eyre is a filter that you can put over anything. And be like,
I also don't think it was necessarily an accident that they did that in the episode where they talked about Jane Eyre and it's talked about
maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
I don't think so. In fact, should I just jump into my production notes now and save your question for the end?
Sure.
My
question's like a fun question.
Yeah, so the nice dessert. Yeah. Okay, so I think
a nice dessert.
Yeah, Lillian.
A tiramisu.
I think you're picking up on some good frequencies there, Lillian.
A Jane Eyre misu.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go. Jesus, Sam. Jeez, pull your weight. This is why you're here. No, but I think you picked up on some good frequencies there, Lillian, because so the executive producer of Voyager, her name is Jerry Taylor. She also wrote this episode. She wrote a bunch of other episodes for this series. But so she was the one who really wanted to put this kind of Janeway acting out a Gothic novel into the overarching story.
For 12 seconds?
Well, so she wanted to do this story in season 1, but the other producers were like, no, it's not quite right. So she finally got it here. The overall audience reaction to the story made it so that they never completed this plot line, but she had written completion episodes where this would be acted out and finalized, and then she even wanted other holo novel adventures for for Captain Janeway, but they didn't end up doing those. She also, in another interview that I read about her talking about this episode, she talks about how she is a fan of like Gothic literature, Gothic stories, and she wanted to bring that into the story, but she's like, it wasn't as well as received as we hoped, so we just kind of let those go to the waste. But yes, so I think she definitely is a Jane Eyre fan, clearly used that as her inspiration and wanted to bring that more so into the story.
I wonder if there was like producer kind of meddling with that, where they're like, this is not what the nerds want, you know?
They just don't know about the Pipers of the world. Yeah. It's Piper such. I think totally. The real theme of this episode of Air Buds is Piper is unique and special and beautiful and wonderful, and we love her. And I think that this is that what we're hearing is these producers they didn't know about the Pipers of the world, and they were wrong. And that's their fault. And in honor of Piper's birthday, we are going to go egg their house. Sam and I.
Yes.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I got a baker's dozen. I'm not stopping at a normal dozen here. We get that extra egg just for spice, you know.
Amazing. I want to come with you guys, so hopefully you can shove me in a suitcase.
You're going to be the getaway driver, and for your birthday, you're allowed to abandon us if we get caught.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm also going to be fully trekked out. I'm going to have my little like Vulcan ears. Yeah, it'll be great. And we'll be like, this one's for Janeway.
Sam will dress like Jane Eyre. You dress like a Vulcan.
Yes,
Sam dresses like Jane Eyre. It'll be great.
You will be Pilot, the dog, whichever of your choosing. Yeah.
I'll try to do all of them at once, and it'll be so bad.
Amazing. You'll just look like Fluffy or Cerberus. Like,
oh my God.
How many heads can you get on your shoulders?
Oh my God. That's so good.
Of course.
Well, Samuel, you had one more question, and then we've got a rate.
I did. So I've got, again, I guess kind of in the spirit of Piper's birthday, I think this question is a little bit of a gift to you.
Oh.
We recently watched, we were watching Back to the Future, and we were like fan casting like a reboot of Back to the Future. And I thought it would be kind of fun to talk about, because I sort of said my expectation of this was, anytime you go to the holodeck, you experience a story and you see every character on the crew overlaid into like some particular role. We didn't see that in this. And I'm curious, if you were to fan cast a Jane Eyre adaptation using only Star Trek characters, who would you put in each role? Now, my guess is,
oh my God,
I think for Rochester.
No. I want to hear her thoughts first, and then I want to hear your guesses. Because I'm sure you have your guesses written down.
Okay.
Yes.
I have 2 thoughts for Rochester.
Okay.
And I have 1 thought for Jane.
So.
And I want to know what you think.
Both of my castings for this are, one of them is a 100% canon couple in Star Trek, and the other one is kind of canon. They were a thing for a while, and then they weren't, but I love the dynamic of it. I would either cast Spock's parents.
I fucking knew it.
Yeah! Spock's parents which is a beautiful Beauty and the Beast romance between a Vulcan and a human being. Sarek, a Vulcan, and Amanda, a human school teacher. So it works. So I'd either cast them in the role, or if I'm tapping into my love of the next generation, definitely Lieutenant Worf.
I fucking knew it! I was like, it's Sarek or Worf. No question.
My favorite, like, stoic men from Star Trek who can totally play the mysterious and gruff, hard to get close to Mr. Rochester.
Perhaps today is a good day to lock a woman in an attic.
Oh my god, yes.
Oh my god.
Ramming speed! So,
gaslighting speed.
No!
oh my god, that's what he shouts when he crashes his ship into another ship.
Oh my god.
But no, so Lieutenant Worf would be Rochester, and then I would cast, I think, Diana, the telepath.
That's right.
Yep.
I know you too well.
You do know me too well. So those are my castings.
That's amazing.
Thank you for letting Piper confirm my suspicions.
Piper, I'm going to need
also
you to
so
send
sorry to
me the
screech.
best pictures of those couples so that I can put them on our Instagram for our lovely listeners.
Oh, I will.
was like,
I'm so excited.
Piper, I think for you, Sarek is the Timmy D of Star Trek.
Yes.
Like that's absolutely the case.
And oh my god,
yeah.
I think even Star Trek fans who might just happen to listen to this, they'll be like, "What?" Like,
like everyone was like, "The fuck are you talking about?"
oh my god, no, I love
really
it so
hope
much.
we get a bunch of Trekkies who have never seen Jane Eyre but get really into our podcast because we're so charming and delightful.
How-
And this
how
is
many
like
is-
how they
yeah,
experience it, and it becomes like a phenomenon that people who've never, and then vice versa too, right? Like I like the idea of like these like amazing, our lovely, lovely listeners who Piper and I talk about our obsession with them all the time, who are like these classic literature people, these like amazing film people, and
nerds.
And maybe they've never dabbled in the Star Trek universe, and we create more and more Pipers until Star Trek goes, you know what? We just got to do it. You know, we just got to we just got to cast it.
Yeah,
do lots of holonovels with
absolutely.
Piper's Dreamcasts.
Dude, no, I love this completely. And also, if anyone who regularly listens to the show is a Star Trek fan, tell us on Instagram. Send us an email.
Yeah,
Tweet at
who's
us,
your
email
Star Trek
us,
Rochester?
find us, BB.
Yes, we'd love to know. These are all my fabulous notes. Do you guys have any concluding thoughts before we do our ratings?
I think that was spot on. This is exactly what I thought. I feel very validated in my.
I think just to like throw in a few other random names, I don't know, just randomly, I think Data should be Mrs. Fairfax, the android.
Oh,
that would be
okay.
interesting. I guess
who's Broccoli?
Brocklehurst, definitely Q. I hate him. He's like this intergalactic being who always comes around to fuck with Picard. Yeah, he's Brocklehurst. He's definitely him.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I hate Wesley. Wesley would be Adele.
Wait, sorry. God damn it, Adele. I was just about to say Adele. I literally like an hour and a half ago, I'm like, Estelle? No, Adele.
Adele.
All right,
Oh
we
my
both got there
God.
together.
Yeah.
Adele.
Perfect.
Well,
Okay, Adele.
I
passed the quiz.
I'm dying to know what your guys' ratings were. So Sam, since you haven't done this before, I'm sure you're already prepared because you listen to our podcast. You're our
Yes.
number 3 fan because Piper and I are number 1 and number 2 tied.
Of course. Of course.
But we'll talk about our ratings, and then we've got we're very excited about next week's adaptation that we're going to be watching. So
Yeah.
I think we'll start with our birthday girl, right? We're going to start with birthday girl and see what her ratings were, and then we'll go with guest.
Very
Okay,
cool.
great.
I'm going to give this if we're going off of Jane Eyre adaptations, I'm going to say a 5 out of 10. If we're going out of Star Trek episodes, I'm going to give it a 8 out of 10. So, Lillian, you can, but both of them are going to be the Tala, that is the Vulcan salute. So you can find lots of GIFs of that Lillian, to use.
That's great.
And
Perfect.
I'm now going to Google to make sure that I pronounce that correctly so that I don't have my fan card
Sam,
revoked.
Well, Sam, Sam does his rating. Are you ready, Sam?
Well, yes, Piper, I'm glad you divided it that way because it was exactly what my intention was. I feel like as a Jane Eyre adaptation, I have to give this 5 burnt faces out of 10. No, I'll give it 4 burnt faces out of 10 because I think there were 4 burnt faces in this episode.
All right.
There was a random crew member in a hallway.
Nope. You were thinking of Paris, who is the helmsman. He was the man with the burnt face in the hallway.
Okay, sorry. A random helmsman in the
Please
hallway.
don't make
Very
me
main
find
character.
an
Go
icon
ahead.
of a burnt face, Sam. That's so gross.
There were some horrifying burnt faces.
I'm
going
to do an emoji with some fire
Cass-
around it.
Yes, there we go.
I'm trying to do my
I'm
rating,
sorry.
okay?
I would be, just in case anybody else gets to be invited to be a guest on this podcast and they're like listening to their previous guests, I'm much nicer to people that aren't Sam.
Yeah, you will be given much more deference than I am being given here. Kess got her face burnt psychically.
Yep.
And then she turned it back on Neelix, a projection of Neelix, and then also the alien that was projecting as Neelix. So I think that's 4 burnt faces in this, unless I can think of another one.
Well,
We didn't get anybody else get burnt up?
Nope, that's
Okay.
good enough for now.
All right, 4 burnt faces out of 10.
Okay.
And is that
as a Jane Eyre adaptation.
Nice.
As a Star Trek episode, I would give it a 7 make it so's out of 10. Because I mean, like my basis for Star Trek is going to be the baseline that I compare everything to is the Jarmak and Dalat on the ocean, like
Nice.
Shaka when the walls fell. Like I love the philosophical, make you think about like a complex topic. And I think as we were watching, I would have maybe said like a 5 or 6 out of 10. But as we are talking about it, I think which would be the case of just about any episode of Star Trek, like the score has elevated because we've had the chance to kind of dissect it and talk about it a little bit more.
Absolutely.
And I think that is like the true essence of what sci-fi is for, is to make us think about, give us a lens to look at abstract topics through sort of like a knowable
and that's
thing.
how
Like,
Piper and I
that's
talk
cool.
about every adaptation of Jane Eyre. Every time that I watch one, I'm like, this was fine.
Yeah.
And then we talk about it and I was like, maybe it was great. Maybe I love this
Yeah.
story.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So Jane Eyre, 4 burnt faces out of 10. Star Trek, let's say 7 make it so's out of 10.
Okay. Yeah. And for that one, Lillian, we can find you a little like GIF of, I keep saying GIF, a little PNG of Captain Picard. He's the one who says
whatever
that.
format.
I love
Yeah.
it. Here's the thing. I'm gonna throw off the scale because I feel like maybe this was the wrong first ever Star Trek episode, and also the wrong episode to be like the wrong first Jane Eyre episode. So I'm just gonna give it. I'm fully pulling myself away from both forms of media and going, how much joy did this specific thing bring? And my initial score has gone up, but for a different reason than what Sam just listed with his very insightful philosophy conversation, which is I originally probably would have rated it like a 6 out of 10 overall in terms of like how much did I enjoy it. However, given the fact that it's Piper's birthday and seeing just how much joy this thing of the 2 forms of media that my best friend loves so much coming together, I'm rating this 7 out of 10 Pipers. I'm giving it a whole other point
Lillian.
just for and Piper's my scale. And Sam, I did just win. In case you were wondering, I won the podcast episode.
Wow. Okay.
You guys, my greatest birthday present is
Wow.
getting to talk about Star Trek with my friends.
Yay!
So I am so happy. Thank you.
I won't even ask about the Piper to pilot ratio. Here, what the exchange rate is for Pipers to pilots. I won't
Couldn't
put you on the
possibly
spot.
compare.
Sam, one does not simply compare
If we're
Pipers to
going-
pilots.
if we're going with average, it's tough because it's like if we're going average human to average dog's way better than the average human.
The dog wins.
So you really got to start grading it on that curve.
Piper is
huh?
not your average
Yeah.
human at all.
Lillian,
Yeah.
I will
Pilot's not
say,
your average
I'll
dog.
take the pressure. I'll take the pressure off for you. If we have a classic, what is it? The little like train track scenario where I'm tied to one train track and then a whole pack of pilots is tied to the other one. I think I'm going to use a line from Star Trek and say the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and therefore you should kill me and save the pack.
Here's the solution that I have for this. I'm going to do the slightly different version where you're standing on a bridge and there's somebody you push. And so you're on the train tracks, the pack of pilots on the train tracks, Sam's on the bridge. I push him in front of the train and it's fine.
Oh my God. Okay. So now I'm going to ask
Lillian's like option number 3.
And behind door number 3 that you didn't know was there.
How many dogs are too many dogs to murder?
We can't do this, Sam.
Life?
I can't do this with you.
No, veto.
So I am going to wrap this show up now. I'm taking the reins and I'm wrapping it up. And I just want to say that one tiny little note. This is by far our longest episode for sure. And
yes,
I feel like it's honoring my spot and my guest starring on your guys' podcast, where it was also notably your longest episode. So maybe it's not the content. Maybe it's the 3 of us could talk for days.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do our little wrap up, but I do want to mention we are really excited about next week's episode. We are going to do our oldest adaptation yet. And Piper pointed out that this was actually the first feature film with sound. For Jane Eyre, the first adaptation with sound. And it's the 1934 adaptation of Jane Eyre. And this was suggested to us by one of our amazing listeners on Twitter. Thunder Snow 1996 is the username.
Oh, cool.
Don't know their actual name. Very cool name. Makes me feel like we're not as cool as they are, but that's fine. They listen to our podcast, and that makes us also cool, probably.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Thank you, Thunder Snow.
So we're going to do that next week. And I know that I've given Sam a lot of crap, but with as much sincerity as I can muster, I do appreciate you coming on. It makes it so much fun. And I always love chatting with you. And obviously our birthday girl, Piper.
Yeah. Aw.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Lillian, for telling us about that amazing thing. Thank you, Thunder Snow, for recommending it. I can't wait. I think, as you say, let's kind of close this out. It's been 2 hours, and I'm definitely gonna have to spend another 2 hours editing the whole thing.
Oh no.
Yeah.
But so before we go, you guys can find us anywhere. We are at Airbuds on all social media. You can reach out to us. Airbuds@gmail.com. I was about to make a weird baby hybrid between our podcasts, but instead I'm going to hand over. Sam, where can people find you if they want to know more about you when you're not doing this?
If you want to find more of me, you can find us on Piper and my other podcast, World Forge, where we talk about story analysis and story tropes and how to build worlds and tell bigger and better stories using crazy, weird, random prompts and ideas from our listeners and friends and all kinds of things. We are at WorldForgePod on Twitter and worldforgepod@gmail.com. If you liked listening to us pretend like we knew what we were talking about here, there's plenty more of that on World Forge with a different topic every week. So we would love it if, maybe we'll do an episode where we take a random episode of Jane Eyre and build it into a Dungeons and Dragons story or something. I don't know.
I get to be the guest.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be fabulous.
I've had a blast today. I think I achieved my goal of mischief.
I'd say so.
And I really thank you both for allowing me to come on and ruin your wonderful show.
Thank you. You're welcome.
It was great to have you.
Thank you both so much.
The two different voices here, Lillian, yeah. And I'm like, yeah.
Guess who's marrying Sam? Yeah. Not me.
It's Lillian. Surprise twist.
Absolutely.
Day of the wedding, I'm like, Lillian, put this on. And you're like, this is a wedding dress. And I'm like, I know what I said. Anyway, guys, you can find this next adaptation on YouTube. Watch it with us. We'll talk about it next week. Until then, happy birthday to me. I had the best friends in the world. And happy Jane Eyre reading and watching.
Yay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.